Okay, welcome all. A lot of familiar faces. Nice to be back. Some new faces, also nice. Okay, I wanted to discuss the song that that we sing on Shavuos morning, for those who noticed, by laning. Now, it's a rare occurrence. It only happens on Shavuos, really, that we open up the laning with like a niggin, right? We start take it the Sefer Torah, we put it on the bima, we get started, we get set up shop, and then usually the Balkaira or someone else sings the song of Akdamos, which is, I think, 40-something stanzas. The first 24, I'll say they're Aleph Beis, and the last 24, I think, are Mazkir, the Shem Mechaber, which is Reb Meir Shliach Tzibor, and it's like an acronym for his name. It says that he's the Mechaber of the song. Now, it's a unique occurrence. It's kind of like a one-off occurrence, I guess, in the Kriyas HaTorah calendar, and it needs to be discussed. Like, who wrote it? How did it end up here? Why is it in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah? What's the story? What's the background? What's going on here? Now, there's a lot of little story tidbits about this that I think are nice to share. Some of them are very, very outlandish, like hard to believe. So let's start with that first. I think everyone's pretty familiar with the story. I'll just share it, bring everyone up to speed in the same place. There's an old story. Here, let me frame it with a quick question. Back in the day, the minig was to say Akdamos like this. They would open the Sefer Torah, the Kohen would make a bracha, the Balkaira would read the first pasuk of the Kriya for the first day of Shavuos, and then after the first pasuk, they would sing the song of Akdamos, and then they would continue on to the next two psukim, and the Kohen would make his bracha. Now, there's going to be, and we'll go into this, the poskim, we're going to have a tumult about this, if it's allowed, if it's not allowed, but the question is why? Why was it ever set up in that manner? Why was it set up after one pasuk into the Kriya? How did that happen? Like, what's the story? Now, there's an Eli Rabbah, who was one of the Rabbanim of Prague, in the 1700s, early 1700s, who writes that the reason why we put it there is because the first pasuk of the Kriya ends with the word Bamidbar, and Kayadua, the Maisa Neira, the incredible story that happened with Akdamos, happened in a Midbar, and therefore we inserted at that part of the Kriya. That's what the Rabbah says. Now, what's this Maisa Neira that the Rabbah is referring to? So the story goes as follows. There was some sort of magician or practicer of the occult arts who lived in the Rhine in the early, it's Rashi's Tkufa probably, it's like in the 1000s, in the early 1000s. And he had a very particular set. He was a teaching hospital. He taught the kishif and the occult to people. And the way it would work is as follows. He would invite 10 students at a time to come sit with him. He had some sort of magical wheel that was like suspended between heaven and earth. All 10 of them would climb onto the wheel. And the way he took his payment was as follows. He would teach the group, and then at the end he would select one test sample, and he would, bludgeon the guy to death with all his magic, and that was the payment structure. Meaning, so it was kind of like a little bit of kishif roulette. You would go learn kishif, and out of it, 9 people would walk out certified practitioners, and 1 person would be killed by the master on the way out. That was the structure. Now, it seems there were Jews who were curious about this kishif arrangement, and either 10 Jews or 1 Jew signed up to be part of this, wheel of doom, whatever you want to call it. And one of the Jews there realized that the master was turning too much of attention to him. He realized he was going to be the guy at the end that the master was going to kill. And he decided that he has to get out of this. And on the wheel of doom, he cried out, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That seemed to have broken the master's, spell. And he was able to escape, or they were all able to escape. Now, this master, Kishif person was very upset about this. And he decided to take it out on the Jews. Now here was where the nuschos diverge. There are some that say he killed many Jews, some say he killed a few Jews, but it seems he had a method. This is all brought down. This is a story that's recorded. The first documented time, I think, in writing that we have today is recorded in the early 1600s in like a manuscript that's still held in, I forgot which university, the Yale or Cambridge, one of the main universities in Europe has the manuscript from the early 1600s of this story. Now it seems he had an ability. He would go and he would just tap the guy on the forehead. Anybody he would tap on the forehead would just that was the end of them. And he would walk around, and every Jew he saw, he would tap them on the forehead to make up for this Jew who ruined his school. And according to one of the accounts, it got to the point where it was 30,000 and some change Jews who were killed in this manner. And it was becoming a big problem that needed to be solved. Now the Jews of the Rhine finally petitioned him. There's a king's name in the story. I didn't bother looking him up if he's real or fake or when he lived, but there's a king's name in the story over there, and the Jews petitioned him, and he agreed that instead of this, kishif expert just running amok and killing anybody he wants, there's going to be a one-off, a showdown. You bring your best practitioner, he'll bring his best to it, and whoever wins, will carry the day, and that's going to settle this outstanding debt. Now, the Jews of the Rhine were not very proficient in this form of black magic. They didn't know how to go to fighting with this guy, so they were at a loss. And they selected a person by the name of Reb Meir Shliach Tzibur, who was from. Now, it's interesting. A chazan in those days was more of like a rav than a chazan. Like a chazan's job was more of what we would call a rav's job today. There were no rabbanim really. Kamat. I don't know if too many rabbanim from Rashi's days. There was yeshivas. There was different people. Most people worked. Even Rashi worked. Even Tam worked. They all had parnassus. Like there wasn't too many rabbanim, but a chazan was the officiator of the shul. Was kind of a rav. In any case, they selected Reb Meir Shliach Tzibur to be the guy to go do it. They sent him across the Sambatyon to find a practitioner in this type of black magic from from the 10 Shvatim. He went on Shabbos, and the way the tale has it, he came on Shabbos across the Sambatyon, and he crosses the Sambatyon in a boat, and he looks, I guess, like a from Jew with a big beard and his frock, and he walks in, and immediately they bring him to the Bezdin of the Asar Shvatim, and they want to put you to death. You're not allowed to travel on Shabbos. How are you here on Shabbos? Sambatyon only works on Shabbos, you can only get through. He said, no, I'm here in a Pikuach Nefesh on a rescue mission. I need to save all the Jews of the Rhine. I need someone. They made a girl, and the girl landed, the short straw landed on a frail old man by the name of Dan. Dan was sent back instead of Reb Meir Shliach Tzibur to the Rhine to do the battle, and that battle is recounted in great detail in many different versions of it. Rocks in the sky and mountains and crushing mountains, and ultimately the Reb Dan is able to best this Keshev Macher, and he puts him to death, and this resolves the issue. But now Reb Meir Shliach Tzibur, who had been a Shliach Tzibur, it's in his name, and a master Python, a master contributor to the Piyut and to the Siddur. What's interesting is that he actually seemed to have been a big expert in Navi. Rashi, in Nach, not in the Ta of Nach, but in Nach, in Navi, Rashi quotes Reb Meir Shliach Tzibur several times. Like 5-6 times he quotes Pirushim that he heard from him. So he must have been an expert in Navi, like a big, Navi expert. But he realized that he's never going to go back to his hometown, to the Rhine, to the people that he knew, and he wanted to send them a parting gift, and he sent them this tefillah of Akdamos that we say in Shavuos. He said, read this on Shavuos. That's what he sent them. Now, what did he say? He sent it with Reb Dan. Yeah, he sent it with Reb Dan. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't have to be on Shabbos. Maybe it took a few days. We don't know exactly the version. Reb Dan sewed it into his suit, so he shouldn't be carrying extra on Shabbos, and took it back with him. And this is how. Maybe he memorized it. I don't know. Oh, you're right. Good point. Yeah. Okay. So he sent back the Piyut of Akdamos with him to the Rhine. And this Piyut slowly catches on. It becomes very popular. And by the time, the Paiskim were writing in the 1500s, this is a ubiquitous Piyut. Everybody says it. And the question just about placement of the Piyut and whatever. Now, there's a few interesting components of this. Okay, so the story is a fabulous story, and this is what Eli Rab is referring to. And it's rare that you find such a type of story mentioned in a mainstream Paiskim, like in a primary Paiskim. Eli Rab is one of the mainstream Paiskim, and he's mentioning a very fantastical story that there's, that existed. And he explains, that halachic detail of it. Now, we'll go into that detail in more depth in a second, but this is the story that's told. Now, in any case, let's just talk about what this Piyut of Akdamos is for a second. So Akdamos it's the type of Piyut that, unfortunately for most, is drive-by territory, because first of all, timing. Second of all, the language. It's written in very dense Aramaic, full of ramazim and rimzei ramazim to different chazals and gemaras and etc. It's also terrible timing, right? Because we read it, Shavuos morning. But basically, it's broken up into a few different components. I just want to explain what it is before we talk more about it. Halacha. It starts off. It's Akdamus Milin V'Shira Yeshusa. It's like, let me start with a few words. Avla Shakilna Herman Rishus. I take Rishus. Bivave Trei Tlas Aftach Ben Akshusa. With these 2-3 stanzas, these 2-3 things that I'm going to say. Bivari Divavi Vitari Adil Kashusa. Fine. Then it goes on and talks about the godless of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For the next 10 stanzas, it talks about how great Hashem is. Then from there it cycles on and it talks about the Pamalya Shamala, how big the Malachim are. Chayil Elef Alfin V'Rava L'Shamusha Chadatin Nevoit L'Tzafrin. It's a whole very grand and explicit display of how big and how grand the Pamalya Shamala is, the Avodah that's happening in Shemayim. From there it continues on and talks about Klal Yisrael's participation. So it frames, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness, the Pamalya Shamala's greatness that surrounds him, and then how Klal Yisrael even supersedes them. Klal Yisrael's commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and their shvachim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes into a bunch of things about that. In particular, it talks about Klal Yisrael's dedication to the Torah. Savi v'chamid v'ragig idilain belusa, which he talks to Klal Yisrael's like great chukah for the Torah. And then it brings something interesting. This is something very Ashkenazi. It's very medieval Ashkenazi, this type of conversation. It brings a question from the Goyim asking. And the Goyim say, what is wrong with you people? Why are you still sticking with this? Why are you so busy with this? Why are you willing to die for this? Why, like Ashkenazi Jews were willing to die early and often for their Judaism. And it frames it such. Like the Goyim are asking, like, why? What's this why are you dead set on serving, this God, in their opinion, erroneously, and being willing to, die for it? And the nations have kindness, and they question Klal Yisrael's commitment, etc. And then Klal Yisrael answers, B'chachma mesivus Elohim. Klal Yisrael answers them, tells them how great our relationship with Hashem is, and how Yemais Mashiach is coming, and Elam Haba is coming, Binyan Beis Hamikdash, Gan Eden, etc. And then it signs off. That's the end of the Piyut. I mean, there's a little bit more, and it ends off with like a like a brach at the end of Klal Yisrael. That's the Piyut. It's many stanzas. I mean, today you could Art School has a Pirush and Akdamos already. It's not hard to read, and it's a beautiful Piyut, and it's Taka Mali V'Gadish of like different references to Gemaras and Chazals and etc. That's the Piyut that we're saying. Now, why is it written in Aramaic is a bit of a mystery, which hopefully we'll get to discuss. Why is it written in Aramaic? Almost no tefillah in Aramaic. As a matter of fact, the Gemara tells us that Malachim don't understand Aramaic, and tefillah is not supposed to be in a language they don't understand. We rely on the Malachim to intercede and to bring our tefillahs to Hashem. And if we say it in a language they don't understand, they can't really be of assistance to us. So why is this in Aramaic? That's a good question. And all of our piyutim, interesting. And this is the bigger question: is why is it placed where it's placed? Like, how did it end up in that placement? So now I want to talk about that from a halacha standpoint. But I really want to. I've done this in the past. I've spoken about this topic in the past, and I think it's an opportunity to memorialize a not very well-known Talmid Chacham who gave his life for his sefer. So we'll talk about it in a second. I just want to like this. So the Maril, who's the Avim in Ashkenaz, he's the first one of Ashkenazim Minhagim. He brings down as follows. Let me just quote it how it is. It says, "B'Shvuos Aimrim Hadibur Akdamas Milan." On Shvuos we say this thing called Akdamas Milan. Achar Siyam Pasuk Rishon de Kriyas HaTorah. After the first Pasuk Kriyas HaTorah, Shu B'Chodesh Hashlishi V'Chulu V'Chein B'Yom Sheni. We say Yitziv Piskam Achar Pasuk Rishon Shel HaTorah. V'Bein Bracha LeKriya Ef Shedavi Hefsik. So the Maril tells you, he's quoting from Rav Isaac Turner, I think, that we say this Piyut after the first pasuk of the Kriya, then we finish the Kriya and we continue on. Not anything different than that because it would be a hefsik. This is the Meril's minig. And the Levush brings it as follows. Now the Taz in our Chaim, it's in Taf Tzadik Dal, it's in Tzivkat and Aleph, he asks as follows, and I want to read you the Taz. The Taz says, Yesh l'tmaya harbe. It's very strange, he says. Heach rashayim lahafsik b'Kriya. How are we able to make a hefsik during Kriyas HaTorah? Ta'filu l'saper b'divrei Torah aser, k'mei shekhasav b'simen kuf mem vav. V'chala ha'terim and iskarim sham einam kan. Kol shekem b'shevach hazeh. What is this stam like Shevach that we're saying in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah? Shu'enim Inyan HaKriya. It has nothing to do with the Kriya of the day. It's some sort of Shevach about a Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the relationship. Well, how does it belong here? How does it fit in here? It says, V'shamati Mikarav, the Taz writes, I heard that recently, now the Taz is writing this in the early 1600s, he says, Shamati Mikarav, I heard a recent innovation, She'en Higu Rabbanim Muvhakim, he doesn't say who that is, but that great Rabbanim were Mesader, L'Shoyer Akdamas Koidim Sheyaschal HaKayin HaBracha Sh'Kriyas HaTorah. Instead of shtupping it in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, we do it beforehand, which is how we do it today. Today in shul, that's how it's done. This is how Taz's minig is how it's done. He says, I heard that the way to do it is not to fit it in. We do it, before the kriya starts. V'chein roya linig b'chala kehila. V'gam b'yitziv piskam shayim b'yam sheni achapasuk rishon shel haftarah. Roya linig kein el shein haftarah chamir kolkach m'kriyas haftarah. So the Taz says, I heard of a new minig. I like this new minig. It's a good new minig. This is how it should be. The minig should be, we should do it before kriyas haftarah starts, not in the middle of kriyas haftarah. Now, ultimately, the Taz is vindicated by Klal Yisrael, and that becomes the minig. The Mishabur already writes, Rosh Shulchan, and the modern place can all write like this. But I want to a little bit chart the discussion of it, and just a little bit memorialize a very special, not so well known pasuk, and then we'll get to the conclusion of the daf. The Rabbi Yaakov Emden was a very famous Achron, had a grandfather whose name was Rabbi Ephraim of Vilna. Rabbi Ephraim of Vilna was Rabbi Yaakov Emden's, great grandfather. Rabbi Yaakov Emden's great grandfather was Rabbi Ephraim of Vilna. The Chacham Tzvi's maternal grandfather was Rabbi Ephraim of Vilna. He escaped Vilna during the Swedish-Kazakh wars, which I don't think anybody knows too much about. But there was in the early 1600s, the Swedish-Kazakh wars. He escaped during those wars. He eventually went to Hungary-ish, and he became a Rav in, the name escapes me in a second, but a famous Hungarian town. Afen, I think. He became a Rav in Afen, which was then possibly even under the Turkish Empire. It was like a mixed city, mixed between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. And he became a bit of an expert on the interplay between Sephardic and Ashkenazic minhagim, which is an interesting, there's a whole cadre of poskim that fit into that basket who became experts. Anyone who lived in the Turkish Empire, the European part of the Turkish Empire, became a bit of an expert in those. Those were often the fights that were going on. But the Shai Ephraim lived there. He actually got involved in a tremendous machlekes when he got the Steller. He moved to Afen, or Bone, I forgot what city it is, and they had a rule on the books established with the Rav previously that no one who has relatives in the city is allowed to be hired as a Rav. It was to avoid corruption. It was to make sure people didn't hire their relatives. So nobody who has relatives in the city is allowed to be hired. Now, when he came to that city, he had a son, and there was a Yisema in town who needed a shidduch, and he made a shidduch with that Yisema. And some people sued him, and they said, not appropriate. Now you became a mechutin with people in the town, and you can't be Rav. And he says, give me a break. I schlepped here from hundreds of miles away. You brought me here to be a Rav. I'm like a credentialed, established, known Talmud Chacham. You schlepped me from who knows where to be a Rav over here. I did a chesed and I did a shidduch with like some local Yisema, and now like I'm corruption. Now I became corruption. It's ridiculous. This is not what the rule meant. And they wrote to many Rabbanim, and it's interesting that several of the big Rabbanim that they wrote to paskined against him, but several paskined like him. Some of the more prominent ones paskined like him, and he didn't rest on it. He sent a letter to Yerushalayim, where the previous Rav had retired to, and inquired about the original time when the rule was made, and got documents from that Rav stating that he's correct and this is not corruption, and he kept the shteller. That's a few of the chuvas in the Sefer. It's not interesting. It's in Sha'ar Ephraim. It's in his Shuvah Sha'ar Ephraim. Now, Tshuva Tes and Tshuva Yud are an inquiry from the Venice Bezdin. Now, the Venice Bezdin is another kehillah that's mixed between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. And the Ashkenazim were doing their minig of Akdamos. They were saying Akdamos on Shavuos the way Ashkenazim do it in the middle of the Kriya. And the Sfardim must have become aware of this, and they said, what are you doing? It's a hefsek. You have no right to do that. And the Sfardim were upset at Ashkenazim. They said, Amaratzim, what are you doing? You're ruining Kriyas there in Shavuos with hefsekim. Can't do that. Stop doing it. So they sent a letter, the Ashkenazi Kehillah in Venice sent a letter to the Sha'ar Ephraim asking him, what's the deal here? And the question that they asked him is not whether Akdamos should be, that's like almost like a secondary question, where Akdamos' placement should be. The real question they ask him is, do the Sfardim have any business butting into our business? That's the question. Do the Sfardim have any stature, any standing? Are they able to tell us what to do, or should we just tell them buzz off? We're Ashkenazim, we do our thing. And the bulk of the tshuva, and it's a long tshuva, is about that the Sfardim don't have a right to tell Ashkenazim what to do. That's the bulk of the tshuva. It's interesting tshuva. And then like a little bit at the end, he's like, matzdik the minig. And he says, no, it's a good minig anyhow, and we should leave it. And we'll get to that part. I just want to share something fascinating about the Sha'ar Ephraim. His son, Sha'ar Ephraim didn't publish his sefer in his lifetime. Sha'ar Ephraim died at 60 years old. His sefer wasn't published until posthumously, till a few years later. His son put out the sefer, and his son writes as follows. His son, Arya Yehuda Levi, writes as follows. I want to read you what he writes. I don't know if this exists in any other svarim. It says, V'hine b'yamim ha'ela, in those days, yamim shel tsar, b'shnas taf lamed ches. It was the year, taf lamed ches is 1678, right? 1678. The year 1678, Bizmana Magefa, Resichas Takfu Aleinu Rois Rabbis V'Tzaras. Rischa, I'm sorry, it was a terrible time. It was Magefa, it was a terrible time. Tzara el Tzara Nigsha. Wave after wave of Tzara. So it was Zeyatzer Rishayna B'Venisenu Rabbi B'nai HaGadol. Hay Achi, he says his name, my eldest brother was the first one from our family to perish in the plague. He died right away, and his name was Chizkiyo, I think. From the Erev Shabbos Kodim, the Erev Shabbos Kodesh b'Yom Misas Shmuel Ramasi Chaf Ches Leir Balim Menuchase b'Mayla Shimsha. On Erev Shabbos, as the sun was high in the sky, my brother Chizkiyo was niftar on the Yahrzeit of Shmuel Navi. Hu Hagvir HaChacham Amurim Fine. Okay, that's he brings. Then he says as follows. One second. He was 30 years old. That's what Tamim Pa'aloi. It's very sad. He's writing about his brother who was 30 years old, a young man who perished from the plague. He says, Hein Kolei Rasa Ein. All of this that I'm just describing poignantly and sadly over here, my father, the Sha'ar Ephraim, witnessed. Woe is to the eyes that saw this, like a father who lost his son. During the Shiva of my brother, I myself, the publisher of the Sefer, writes, I fell deathly ill from the same plague. And he says, my father came over to me while I was laying in bed on my deathbed. He says, my father, he wrapped himself in his talis, his hands were outstretched heavenward, he refers to his father, the Kohen Gadol. He was a Kohen. This is what my father, the Kohen Gadol, said with Tfilah. He says, Ana Hashem, yehi nafshi tachas nefesh b'ni. I want to swap my life for my son's life. Yedidi, Yechidi, Ben Zekunim huli. Hashiva na the asay miyit and moisi tachtecha b'schus Yitzchak Avinu hanekad keseh. My father said, I want to be the Akedah. Let me be the Seh HaNekad instead of my son. He says, Ukishmaya kol dvarov, nehi ubechi yashavti alerish tvai. I broke out crying. And then he says, it was a short time while he was still in the middle of his tefillah. V'niyad Hashem nagabi,